for?
There we go. All right, Dan, feel free to go ahead and reshare slides. And you can take it away.
All right, I'm going to spend the next couple minutes talking a little bit about the origins of Python. Python, similar to R, is an open source language, free for all. Python also serves as the programming language of choice for popular tools and platforms such as Google Search, Spotify, Instagram, and YouTube. It was created by Guido van Rossum, a Dutch developer, and released in 1991. Since then, the popularity has only increased. Per an October 2021 report from Tobii Index, a website rating the popularity of programming languages, Python was the most popular. It is a fairly simple and easy to understand language supported by a breadth of users, providing many free helpful libraries. In fact, per Python Package Index, there are over 333,000 different pieces of software freely available for use and download. One example is MetroServer 0.016, which is a module used to obtain and read Dutch weather data from metroserver.nl. Helpful, no doubt, in determining the airspeed velocity of unladen European swallows. Besides using fairly easy to understand syntax, what can only be done one way in other languages can be accomplished multiple ways with the same outcome in Python. For example, single and double quotations are used interchangeably, contrary to SQL. You can import various math libraries to calculate averages and means, or you can do it manually by adding and dividing. Finally, Python is a standard on most OS installations, allowing users to create and run programs directly from terminal or command prompt. You can also use Python for app development, website scraping, data analysis, sentiment analysis, and machine learning from a variety of software, including an IDLE interface, Jupyter Notebooks, or directly in a browser. There are a variety of resources available to help as well, including but not limited to Stack Overflow, Codecademy, PySlackers, Python Discord, and PyLadies. In short, unlike Shrubbery, assistance is readily available.
So in terms of, Dan, you already described how Python is definitely takes a lot of inspiration from MontyPython in terms of the cultural impact and how it tries to integrate some of the fun jokes in with it.
Did I?
Maybe I'm misremembering where we're going to make sure that that is brought up, but you've already made 2 MontyPython jokes that I'm aware of. You may have slipped in another one. I'm definitely not a MontyPython expert, but I figured I would bring it up.
Nice.
But so our scope today for what we're hoping for you to walk away with is both some of the trade-offs, because there are pros and cons for using any sort of reporting tool. And so we want to also give a little more detail into some of the Python's capacities, or at least what I know Python can do based on a very kind of specific application, but could be useful, could broaden your horizons for what's possible. And as part of my work with that, it's probably helpful to examine how this task that we'll talk about is actually it's multiple subtasks in order to complete the entire process from beginning to end. So that logic, that breaking things down is a useful aspect of what we will talk about today. So all of this started because of Al Swigard's book, Automate the Boring Stuff with Python, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I found it to be relatively beginner friendly for basics like installing Python and an IDE, an integrated development environment is what I think IDE stands for, but also data types, again, just rather beginner friendly. And so we've got the link to the website here. And he has been so generous to actually currently his material for that book is available online for free, that you can follow that link, check it out, and see if it's worth it to you to potentially purchase like a physical copy for. It was worth it for me. But I will say that of the concepts that I used for kind of the project that we're going to talk about, this task that I automated, about half of the concepts that I used were from that book. The other half was definitely from the University of Google and Stack Overflow. Anytime you're dealing with Python and coding, there is a lot of this process where you're trying to figure out, okay, what other code has already been written, so I'm not reinventing the wheel. How can I copy and use and adjust appropriately someone else's codes. That way I can get it to work for what I need to do. So there is a bit of scrounging around the internet that does need to happen, but hopefully some of the notes that we've left behind in code that we will share today will make that process easier for you. So other good context to know about us is that at COD, we generate data sets with SQL, SAS, and SAS we get data sets from like live data using an ODBC connection, stands for Open Database Connectivity. We don't know much about what it is. Have fun talking to IT about it at your institution, but we just know that we needed an ODBC connection to access SQL Server through SAS, for example. Swigard's book recommends using the Mu editor as an IDE. I found it wasn't quite working for what I wanted to do. I'm not sure why. I just know that the Python idle IDE that comes with Python was sufficient, but I figured that was worth noting. We will share a couple of screenshots of what the Mu editor and the idle looks like. We will share code in the chat during this Zoom session, and also code slides and this recording will be made available on the IR website after the forum. So that is the good news. So go ahead, Dan, let's show them what both Mu, this one, it kind of simplifies things, looks a little bit more approachable, more friendly, but it may not fully work for this particular situation, this application that we're going to talk about. But it's what he recommends when you're just getting started, and it's a good start. And then the idle editor, this is what it looks like. Less fun, no big round buttons, but it works. We will have a point after Dan takes over where we will allow questions. I will give further commentary and then we'll have questions at the end, just so you guys know. Cool. Yeah, the code that we're going to give you, it's not going to work immediately, but it is only a flesh wound. We will talk through some of the things that we know will need to be added into the code for it to work for you guys. So take it away, Dan.
As you can see here in research and analytics, we get a number of data requests presenting a dilemma. Do we hand the request off to IT or do we do it in-house, so to speak? The next few moments will be spent walking through how we decide whether to hand it off or to do the report in-house. Like some of you, we tend to get many similar requests during the year: class lists, contact lists, new student lists, course enrollment lists, and the like. As such, we need to be strategic in how we handle these requests. So to help in the decision-making process, we weigh two factors: the repeatability factor against the customizability factor. For repeat reports like daily enrollment by subject and course, we will work with IT and business objects to create a report which everyone with business objects can access. We go down the business objects route when the report meets the points mentioned on the next slide. These are permanent, unchanging reports, refreshed nightly and accessed by many within the institution, and maintained and created by IT, being vetted through their approval process as well. Many of our ICCB extracts are within this category. The next tool of choice for us is Tableau. For these reports, we weigh who will be needing these reports and what decisions will they be making. How do the needs of a chair differ from a dean, from a general user, or from cabinet, for example? And since the audiences for these reports are similar and we only have 100 viewer licenses, we as an office decide who gets a license, for how long, and what they can access. For example, our board and cabinet can access everything, whereas our continuing ed folks are limited to their own folder, which generally focus on their own students. Generally, the Tableau reports, which we create in unit, are refreshed according to a predetermined schedule, look nice, and can be available to select users depending on the sensitivity of the data. Again, these are still for general audiences, albeit with a more narrow focus. We found ourselves using Tableau for what were many of the reports we had previously created in Excel. Many, but not all. The last set of reports, which is the basis for this presentation, are the custom reports, fitting narrow criteria and select numbers of users. Two examples are research on new student orientation and weekly emails about recently admitted students. Both of these requests check the boxes for our third bucket of reporting, SQL to Excel to email. Very specific in that these requests are very specific in both design and audience. They're static, they're ill-suited for Tableau, and we'll need them frequently for a limited period of time. These factors required a solution since the reports needed to be produced and distributed, and since they wouldn't change apart from being refreshed, spending time opening SQL Server, running the query, copying or exporting the results into Excel, formatting, saving, and then emailing these reports was not appealing. Thus, the decision to automate some of the boring stuff using Python was made. So here is part of what the Python program is. The following slides will walk through the tasks and processes carried out by the Python script Kayla wrote at a fairly general level. The specifics are covered later. The first task is to run a SQL query named sql.ex.sql. The query executes, producing the results, which are then exported into an Excel file. The Excel file, named Funtimes Data, and then the run date are saved as part of the file name. Then the Python script formats the header row by changing the color size to match research and analytics color scheme, formats the font to appropriate size and boldness, and after these changes happen, the top row is frozen and the file is saved. The next step in the Python script is to attach 4 different files, the aforementioned Funtimes data file, a PDF file for reference, as well as a useful CSV to help the end user with their request. Research and Analytics logo is also gathered up in this process since it will be used in the pre-written email, which is sent to the user. Next, the program sends a pre-written email to a select group of people already defined in the script. Speaking of the pre-written email, here we see the various recognizable components of email, including the body, email address, and the subject. All of these components are coded directly into the Python script and execute appropriately when the script is run. You can easily update the email text or the email recipients with a few keystrokes, saving lots of time and remaining consistent in delivery. The final step in the script is to move the Excel file, which changes each time the script is run, into a folder for archival purposes. Kayla will now walk through the details and nitty-gritty of the program.
That was a lot. I hope we could take a moment and see what questions you guys might have. We will put in the intent of this presentation is not to necessarily walk through the code line by line, but just to talk in general terms, and hopefully by talking in general terms to have a layout of the code that when you look at it, if you decide to try to use it, it'll make it easier for when you try to parse it and make it work for your needs. So with all of this overallness that we've talked about, are there questions so far? Go ahead and mute yourself or put it in the chat. We will put the code that we have prepared for you to use or to start with in the chat at the end of the presentation. But for now, we're just wondering about kind of general overall questions. Or did we do such a fabulous job that we can just keep going?
No, it still seems pretty complicated.
I mean, to be fair, it is a process. And it's probably not going to work the first time you try. That's just the nature of code. And I'm beginning to embrace this part of that coding process that, yeah, it's messy and it can be frustrating, but that's part of why I was so excited to do this presentation, for us to do this presentation, so that way it could potentially help it be fewer headaches potentially for somebody else if they think that this kind of process has a place at your institution. So proceeding on, thank you, Dan.
So before you started this process, did you already know Python? Did you?
Oh, no. Other than maybe having perused it just a little bit in terms of data types, kind of installing it, a couple basic stuff, not really. So,
and were you able to learn everything from automate the boring stuff with Python?
No, I would say about half of the concepts that I used for this particular code file that I will share at the end of the presentation, about half was from automate the boring stuff. Yeah. And about half was definitely for kind of more specific questions or tasks that I wanted to do as part of this overall that I got from Google Stack Overflow. Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, I've had a little experience with it, but it's been six, 7 years since it, so I don't remember, I pretty much don't remember much except Python. And it's used in various programs.
Yeah, Python has a lot available.
Yeah.
People had questions and I see that and then it disappeared. This is so sad. All right, in the chat. So are you using Python to change headers and fonts within Excel? Yes. There, yeah, Python, like people, so Python is open source and people have done a lot to work with Excel so that way you can make it, codify it and make it run in Python to edit, change things in Excel. Like, yeah, there is Excel manipulation that is legitimately happening. And then from Paul, do you automate running that Python script using Windows Scheduler? Great question. Or do you manually run it when you need it? We will answer that by the end of this presentation. Thank you, Paul. But yeah, yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. All right, go ahead, Dan. All right, so the way that Dan talked about how those tasks are organized is not quite how the code itself is organized. First, what you'll see is that you'll see what libraries need to be installed on the command line. These are instructions that are commented out because once you install it on the command line and you run the code again, you won't ever need to run it on the command line again. But I put that at the beginning because that is like one of the first things that you will need to do. Then the code shows what libraries will be used in that run for that session, as it were, for when you run that code. So that's what's next. Then I put everything that I thought I would want to edit on a regular basis next. There are a couple of things that you will need to edit that are lower down in the code, but once you edit them, you won't need to edit them again, but they are unique to each machine and to each user. So the variables that are at the top, however, are variables like file names, like where are you pulling stuff from, what file name are you trying to generate, also the emails, anything email related, body, header, the people, that's also stuff at the top because I assume that you don't want to scroll through the entire code to change it. All right, next slide, please. Then the rest of the code is in sequentially that order of the subtasks that Dan talked about. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time with it, but those examples that we saw, while we're only going to provide the SQL code for it, it does reference the file names that Dan showed in the screenshots that were showed earlier in the presentation. So you'll want to change it, but you can just name any PDF, ex2, any CSV, ex4, and it'll work with the code. So you have options and or it shouldn't be too hard to change that code to be what you need it to be. All right, now I think we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty for a couple of things that we do know that you will need to change. So next slide, please, Dan. Yeah, I labeled them quirks. So in this, for the sake of making things shorter in file path directory line size, I just assumed that all the relevant files that you want the Python file to interact with are in the same folder as the Python file. Separate, and then I figured that there would very commonly be situations where you would want to, and then I would want to send emails to multiple people. So I did have to figure out how to do that. So the example code is equipped to do that. Like you put it in single quotes and then you separate the emails with a semicolon. I also recommend that you CC yourself on the email so that we have a record of it. Actually, now I'm trying to think if I checked my sent box, if it would show up. I don't think it does. So that's why I have that recommendation that you CC yourself on any Python email that you're sending out. Line 69 in the example code that we will share has like currently says DSN equal ODBC connection that you have. The DSN equal, like that's part of the code, like you got to keep that. But the ODBC connection name that is unique to your machine and what you set up, and that's on line 69 that we know that you'll have to change. We don't know what that will change to, but once you change it, you won't have to change it again. So there's that note and quirk of the code. Let's tell them about the other quirks really fast. The server associated with your email is found on line 121. once you figure out what it is, you can change it down on line 121, and then you won't have to change it again. As a part of this, I highly recommend that you do not hard code your email password into any code. So to answer the question from earlier about, all right, can we do a Windows task scheduler? You can, but currently this code is set up for like it needs that manual input. And for me, that is a small price to pay for automating all of the other clicks that I would otherwise be doing, that I am currently okay with this format of navigating to a folder, going down to the Python script, clicking on it, waiting for it to generate everything, and then putting in my password. Is significantly fewer clicks than me opening up SQL, generating the data, putting it into Excel, formatting the headers and font and whatnot, sending the email, typing up the email. In terms of just numbers of clicks being saved, I am a-okay with having to manually put in my password. So that is the extent of my expertise and experience with it. Like, I do not know enough about Python for if there is a safe way to have it send emails for you. So this is the solution where we are currently at. Now, if you're not sending an email and you're just trying to get a file generated and move to a specific path, then it's more likely that you could use a Windows scheduler for it, I would say. Because if you're just moving something, like let's say you're moving it to a communal folder where multiple departments can see what's in that folder, that I think is more ripe for scheduling it with a Windows task scheduler. So hopefully that answers Paul's question. And so let's move on to the next slide, I would say. Yeah, and so this code is by no means done. There were certain things that we put into place, like certain situations that we foresaw wanting to do more often, like attaching multiple files. So what the code does is it makes that list of files into a list, so that way it can loop through the list and make sure that it attaches all the appropriate files, no matter how many you have. I also figured that, yeah, you'd potentially want to be able to send an email to multiple people. So that makes sense to try to figure out how to make sure that you can do that. Whereas generating 4 Excel files from 4 SQL files, I didn't necessarily think it was worth putting it into a loop to generate the files. So I just copied and pasted the code 4 times. So that way it would explicitly generate the files 4 times. But again, I use a loop to attach multiple files from a list because I knew that that would be worth making sure I had figured out. So as we're kind of talking about some of these situations, depending on your situation, there can be certain things where this may be useful for, but also it may not quite lend itself towards being able to automate. For example, we knew that one of our coworkers wanted to download students that were signed up for new student orientation into Excel and then attach various other pieces of information that we knew about them. So we possibly could use SAS to take that resulting, manually extract the Excel file and then go to town on it. But we didn't have an API, application programming interface, to programmatically pull that data from, I believe it's called ChapLife is what we call it, for where we would grab what students are enrolled in new student orientation. So yeah, so depending on your situation, there can be limitations, there's trade-offs. And I'm seeing lots of questions in the chat. I think that this might be the end of our official presentation. Am I right, Dan? We got anything left slide-wise?
I don't believe so.
Cool. Then I will go to town on what's in the chat, and then we will take, people can unmute themselves and also ask questions. So Sherry asking, did we learn just what we needed to just from that book? No, not just from the book, but the book was a really great start in terms of inspiring to think about, okay, what's potentially possible. But in terms of full execution, no, not entirely from the book. And I think that's probably pretty common for any type of code implementation, unless there was somehow like some Python code, some Python book specific to institutional research, but it's a book idea. I'm not going to be the one that writes it. Manually run it. Yep. Joe says, you said that your office has consistent formatting for your reports. Is the Python script you developed portable between different projects? Ooh, Joe, I feel like we're gonna come back to your question probably. I can say that there is a slight limitation, or at least from what energy I have put into this, that green is not quite the green I like to use for our institutional research reporting, but it's close enough and it's at least distinctive enough for me to recognize if someone shows it to me to be like, oh yeah, I generated that in Python. So it's not necessarily perfect, but we'll get to the second half of your question after I read Paul's comment. Paul says, I think you can save your password as an environmental variable on your computer and then call it within the Python script. He says he was recently dabbling with this concept in R. So yeah, so it's potentially possible. I don't know, like I'm currently not comfortable without further research, obviously, with like, I just don't know our security. I don't know if I need to talk with IT about it. So I haven't gone down that route, but yeah, this code is not necessarily finished ever, but it is hopefully a great starting point. Follow up on Paul's point is a way to encrypt a password for use by a specific user on the same machine using Windows Credential Manager. Interesting. Very cool. All right, Joe, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and telling us more about what you mean about having the Python script be portable between different projects. I think I need a little more context to fully understand your question. I don't hear you, Joe. It makes me very sad.
Well, I apologize. I appeared to have muted myself on my mic.
There we go.
Can you
Now
hear
I
me
hear
now?
you.
Okay. So regarding portability, specifically on the formatting, you kind of spoke about this already. I was just wondering if a lot of the code you wrote for the formatting of the Excel files, after they've been exported from SQL, is it in such a way that you could easily transfer that part of the Python script between different projects you're doing, so that if you have a consistent format for your reports, that they are the same each time? That was my question mostly. Do you think the script could do that?
Like in terms of will Excel save it off? Like in terms of Python, like between Python projects, yes. But yeah, I'm currently not happy with the green and I just haven't researched it enough to know if I could get it to be what I want it to be. Making the font white, it's white, it's fine. But in terms of like, assuming I'm understanding that you're talking about whatever color scheme Python generates to then is it saved in that Excel file that if I copy paste or whatnot?
No, I meant more that the Python script for formatting the Excel file can be transferred to different projects, so that if you have a consistent reporting format for when you're like, say you have an enrollment report and you've got a new student orientation report, they have similar information, but not exactly the same. Is it translatable format wise between the projects?
I'm sorry, I don't know. The code is definitely copy pastable, but otherwise I don't know if I can answer your question. I'm so sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
But yeah, otherwise, if somebody has another question, feel free to speak up, unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to try to navigate on my machine to find the Python code that I've been promising y'all, so that way I can drop it in the chat. You should be able to open it with any text editor, but unless obviously you have Python installed, it's not going to do anything. So. But yeah, otherwise, I think we might be, unless there are any other questions, what we can do is I can give whatever announcements that we need to, and then we can stop sharing our screen and we can me and Dan will hang around in case there's other questions. Oh, but also, no, we're not done. There is one more slide, Dan. Yeah, like if people want to talk about reporting options that are available at your institutions, like we're talking about this continuum between repeatable and customizable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only continuum that we all experience. So this is also an opportunity to chat about that, since we are trying to also articulate that this particular, honestly, like this Python need, this ability to use Python to send out emails of stuff where the code doesn't change, but the data changes, is really a stopgap measure. Because for Tableau Online, it was mostly for, okay, if there's something that we know that we can get as a Tableau Online data set, or for people to download it from Tableau Online, but they are slow at getting their analytics account request form in, but we promised that we'd provide it to them until they get that transitioned over. So it was more of make it easier on us when we said that we would provide this data to them until they would get a Tableau Online report. That was the impetus for getting this code together to see if it was possible, and it is. Okay, well, we will go through the rest of our slides. I'll handle announcements and then we'll let y'all email program. It's just, I don't know. Like it says, I think it's using our server, because it looks like it's coming from my cod.edu account. So, but
Oh, sorry, I unmuted myself. It might be easier. So maybe I think you mentioned this during the presentation. So if you were looking for your sent email, it does or does not show up?
I don't think it does. I don't think so. Dan, did you ever look for that when you were playing with the code?
It was my experience that it did not show up in sent, but it did show up in my inbox because I had copied myself.
Oh, okay.
And that was the measure that Kayla had put in place to make sure that we knew that the email went through, because it didn't show up otherwise. And if we didn't have a copy of it coming to our inbox, we wouldn't know until someone called us out for it later because they didn't get it, which I'm sure never happens for anybody else in the presentation, just us, I'm sure. So,
right. What was I going to say? Do you know if it runs? I guess if you're running it manually, you wouldn't know this, but if it would run while your computer is locked or asleep. So I guess I'll explain a project I was working on recently that is a little bit similar to this, which was just to pull, let's just say, to send reports on a daily basis. And I had I did it in R, and I scheduled it with Windows Scheduler, but it would send the emails through Outlook, through my Outlook. But it ran into issues where it wouldn't work if the computer was locked. So that's why this is a little more interesting, maybe.
Yeah, interesting. I do know that depending on what query you're trying to run, it may take a little longer to generate or for example, if you're trying to generate multiple files, it can definitely take longer for it to run through that process. Because for example, that example where I said it was generating 4 data sets, like it took at least a couple minutes to try to run through that. But yeah, definitely something to think to troubleshoot through if you are trying to schedule it with like Windows Task Scheduler.
Yeah, thanks for the code. I could probably kind of quickly put together a test case and just see what happens.
Yeah, probably. If you don't mind, like by all means, I will gladly take any feedback of like this worked great or hey, it works for this. Like I am super curious. So that's probably, Dan, go ahead, I guess, go to the next slide, which should have our emails on it. Yeah, it does. So yeah, we are done. Definitely early. I guess I talk fast. But I will go ahead and share announcements that we've got, and then Dan and I will definitely stick around. So after our session, so we've got 4 to 5 p.m. is the second slot of concurrent sessions. Then we've got a break for an hour. We've got virtual happy hour from 6 to 7. Come network, chat, or play trivia. We're going to be on a free phone app called Sporkle Party for trivia. It's quite a lot of fun. And also, please don't forget to fill out session evaluations for any and all sessions that you attend. 5 are necessary for a session to be considered for the Best Presentation Award, and the presenters do appreciate the feedback. So otherwise, I think that that's all that we have, and you guys are free to go. And we will stick around, but I will stop recording.